Really loud. Hello. I wonder if this makes go down.
I don't think so.
Okay. No, don't play with that. I'll stand back. How's this? Is it too loud? You can hear it all right? Is this too loud? All right. I tend to be a waddler and a wanderer, so I will try to stay tethered to this podium so that you can hear me and I look like I know what I'm doing. My name's Jackie Wilson. I see a lot of faces that look like familiar faces to me, so it's good to see you again. I am the Academic Fieldwork Coordinator now at Towson University, and this is Derek Pickett, and he is the clinical faculty predominantly in mental health. So we thank you for coming today, and the topic we're going to be discussing is fieldwork education. And before we get started, there's just a couple things. It's a two-part workshop. Typically, the workshops are like an all-day-long type of affair. We've broken it down into 2 3-hour units. Today, we're going to talk about the fundamentals. So, and then next week, we're going to be doing more of the application types of things. And I like the second one more than the first because I like application more than I like listening. But both, I hope, are going to be beneficial to you. How many people here have had experience working with students as a fieldwork educator? Okay. How many people here are brand new or who never had a student as a fieldwork educator? Okay, some are new. And how many have been a fieldwork educator for more than 10 years? And a few there as well. Lovely. All right, and the way we're going to work this, because it is fundamentals, those of you that have been in the field for a number of years are already familiar with managing and working with students. So my hope is that you will be able to contribute to the discussions and give information to individuals that can help allay some of the fears of the newbies that have never taken a student, and then help those that have been in the field for a while to feel positive about what they're doing in mentoring and working with students, and then we can work together to keep everyone very healthy mentally and enthusiastic about mentoring and working with their students, because I do appreciate what you do and the amount of effort it takes for you to do that. And so I want to thank each and every one of you for that interest, because they sure look good when they come back after being out with you. So we have an activity to begin with. Some of you are from Bayview. Some of you are from Hopkins, some of you from other settings, so you may be familiar with one another, but those of you that are in the mental health setting know that you can't do anything without a team-building icebreaker activity to start off with, right?
Not as bad as you think, I promise. We're not going to have to do trust falls or anything.
So you have had dinner, and you've got your drink. And being true OTs, we cannot forget the dessert and the chocolate. So you want to tell them the directions? They're just supposed to pick their favorite.
All right, so some of you have done this with me in class.
So pretend like you didn't.
Pretend like you didn't. I'm going to pass out some Hershey's chocolates. There are Crackles, dark chocolate, Mr. Good Bar, and regular Hershey's. So pick one, whatever your gut tells you. Don't eat it yet, and pass the chocolates around. I'll start one on this side. And whatever's left over, we can still eat.
So not to make your first selection.
Correct. See if I can't open this without ripping it.
And this is more than an icebreaker. This is an opportunity to start your own self-reflection from the very beginning, okay? I keep wiggling this because I'm afraid it's going to go dead, like timeout locks.
We got that.
Well, I'm glad you read. I'm glad you read.
I think I can.
Even today. All right, so you need to get. You want that picture done? No, you just pick one. Ellie said one. Favorite one. That was ears and here, you know. I see y'all. And then take it. So a good. She's not going to sit. No.
You want to have a joke while we're waiting?
Why did the iPad go to Hopkins?
Why did the iPad?
Because it had.
Oh, that's a good. We're going to sit down.
I love corny jokes like that. All right, I think we're just about through with everybody. So, like Jackie said, it's not really like a team building or anything like that. It's more just to get you thinking, to get you aware. This is the Hershey's Chocolate Personality Test. Let's see if I can make this readable.
That's good. You just can't see all.
Yeah. So, based off of the type of chocolate you chose, it gives you a little description of the type of person that you might be. So, I'll kind of go through them. Milk chocolate. How many people chose the original milk chocolate? Okay, quite a few. So, you're all-American, love baseball, mom, apple pie. You're a cheerleader for your program, level-headed, good PR person, great fundraiser. You're kind, thoughtful. You remember everyone's birthday. You nurture. You're dependable, loyal. You help others to shine. Others often turn to you for help. So
Okay,
those
that's
of
a
you
good
who
one.
chose our milk chocolate, how do you think that fit you? Except for baseball, okay.
All right, and then go on with crackle.
Crackle? How many people have crackles? That's my way to do it.
Oh, that would be the one I left in the back. But go ahead. What's crackle?
Creative, optimistic, always see the cup as half full. You're messy, you have a messy desk or a classroom, but you're organized. You eventually find whatever it is that you're looking for. You like to be hands-on. You're a little offbeat, ditzy, funny, friendly, outgoing, always willing to help. You like surprising things in life, such as the crackle, and you like situations that allow flexibility, change, and growth. I like that. It does actually kind of fit my personality. How about Mr. Goodbarts? This is always the lowest.
And that would be what I would pick.
Okay. So our Mr. Goodbars, analytical and logical. You gather data first before giving an opinion. I can make that bigger since we're only doing time. Play devil's advocate at meetings, tend to see all the possibilities to drive people crazy, sharing all the what ifs. You're not a big fan of deadlines. You like to procrastinate, put off things when you start. You like to be the expert, fit in your own time frame. You can analyze things to death. You like there to be rules for everyone to follow. And you like a lot of structure and don't enjoy big surprises. Does that kind of suit our Mr. Goodbars?
Yes.
Okay. And
Our
our
house
special
is always the cleanest when I have to prepare for a presentation or a deadline. Always everything but. Go ahead.
right toward the end of the semester when everything's our special dark. Who had dark chocolate?
There we go.
Right. You're patient, thoughtful, individualist, and problem solver. You like to see a project through from start to finish. You're a good grant writer. You work well with different people, difficult people, sorry. You are reflective and insightful, have little patience for incompetents or liars. You have high standards for yourself and others. You are dependable, resourceful, and loyal. And did anyone not want to pick a chocolate? Yeah, I think so.
It's a room full of OTs.
It's a room full of OTs.
If there's chocolate, we will come. All right, and the thing to take away with that, it's not just something to be able to do and have a little fun. Again, the icebreaker.
I interrupt you for 1 second.
You got more to say?
I just want to say, please eat now. Eat your chocolate.
Much like every variation on chocolate, here, that's pretty much the way it works with being a fieldwork educator. No one right way. There's no perfect student. There's no perfect supervisor. So what you do is the more you know about yourself and can reflect on how you are as we go through this presentation, you're going to learn the fundamentals. But as you're learning about it, think about how you might apply them or what you might fall down in or what you might need to pay more attention to, because you might know that you yourself, that might not be a strength for you. So, and then recognize also that as you're going through this, that you are getting the students who have all of the academic knowledge that we can give them. They have been through the courses. Many of you here know what those courses are. But with that said, you are the ones that are taking it from the written two-dimensional page to a three-dimensional existence. So it's that cross and the transference, and that takes time. And that's where sometimes people are more nervous. It's like, well, I don't know if I know enough. You know enough because you're practicing and being successful with clients. And you're capable enough because you're already starting to reflect, contemplate as to whether you want to take a student or not and begin to mentor. So we can set those concerns to the side and not even think about them again.
I talk in class, I talk to students about, sometimes we take a time out and say real talk. What we're learning in the book or what we're learning in school is one thing. Practice and need something a little different or a very odd variation of what taught you. And the real talk is where you guys come in, especially on level ones. Students are still pretty new in the program. SMS, like it's their second year, and the master's is still the first year. And so what they're learning, they really want to put into effect. And that's where they do.
And they get excited.
Yeah.
All right, so, well, I went really fast on those objectives because I figured you could read. So those are the objectives for the class. This is the more fundamental level of learning. We will have opportunities for exchange, but by all means, if you have questions or want to comment, please do so. But if it's going to be something individual, save it to the end so that we can have an opportunity to cover material and then apply those individual comments, okay? So the first part that we're going to address is what are the logistics of setting up a fieldwork program? And the reason I want to introduce this to you is because I want you to see the value that the fieldwork has always had within our profession and be able to know what the mechanics are, because it's not just one day you decide that you'll take a student, but there is a whole lot of effort both from the facility where you work, from the academic setting from which you'll take a student, and then both from yourself and from the students. I found this interesting in that it's been part of OT for the last 94 years. Or that was from where this site was first started. The first standards were approved with a 3-month clinical experience, and now we're up to 2 rotations of 3 months each. So it's 6 months of training. And they've been encouraging it in the field since 1923. And I thought that was very interesting because I didn't realize myself that it had been a part of our tradition for so long. So the legal tenets that you just need to be familiar with is that before anything can happen at any fieldwork site, is that there has to be a student affiliation agreement or a contract in play. And that there has to be a certificate of insurance provided to that institution demonstrating that there is professional liability coverage for that student while they're under your care. Your license covers you as you're practicing. The professional liability insurance through the academic setting covers the student while they're practicing under you, so that you don't have to worry about those signatures on there quite the same way. The affiliation agreement, now with Hopkins and Bayview, you're already in play. Baltimore City, we've already got contracts, and most institutions do. The IWB, and I'm not sure if there's some others, but if you're a new facility wanting to expand and add a student, the contract negotiation is the hardest. And it's not because there's anything in it that's particularly difficult, as much as it's the mechanics of who's responsible for what, and what are the consequences if something happens that is harmful to one side or the other. And the areas that are always the problem are the areas of indemnification. If I'm going to sue you because there's a problem, who's going to pay and what's required of it. And how, believe it or not, how the criminal background checks are handled. Because by law, a state university for Towson, and you can find out from each of your schools, is not allowed to look at a student's file and know whether, all we can know is if they passed or failed. We are not able to tell you the details. So that's sometimes a hiccup, because the facility wants to know exactly what the results were, and we can share it online through the student, but we ourselves cannot promote it. So just know that if you're a new facility or wanting to add, or someone you know wants to add, the the field work, that these are the two things that are in play. As soon as the contract is signed, the certificate of insurance is issued, and contracts generally are renewed annually for 5 years, and then it's a whole new process again. Okay? So this is key when you're starting to decide to be a fieldwork educator, and for those of you that have been doing it for a while, I think this is something you've already been experiencing. But you need to come up with these considerations and really reflect on them, because time and management of that time is key. So first of all, you need to find out where the commitment is, not just within yourself, but what kind of commitment and support you get from your company or the institution with which you're working. How do they hold their standards in terms of work production and time with the students, and where do they see the value of that student in that whole experience of service delivery and student education? You can talk to your coworkers that are already working with students and find out the pros and cons of it. Do not talk to someone who's had a challenging student and is recovering from that experience, because it's always draining, and I am not making fun of that. It actually is one of the things that is worrisome to me, is that if we don't have our students where they can be successful, it is exhausting to that fieldwork educator, and there's a lot of feelings. So I like to give them a rest or a respite after somebody that might be challenging, that they get through the program. But by all means, you can find the pros and the cons with that as well. And talk to your director of rehab, because if they're the ones working on the schedule with you or are considering your workload, they need to be aware or be able to share with you what type of time commitment they're willing to support as you're working with students. Does this make sense? For those of you that have been in the field for a long time, are you finding that that is a key thing to be considered as you're trying to take on students? Yes? Okay. All right. The other thing is you need to consider how it's going to impact your service delivery, whether you have to hit a certain number of clients in the course of the day, what happens when you do PAMs as part of your service, how much time is there for family education, how are you going to manage HIPAA and educate your student to know to guard certain things and follow certain procedures, and just know what you want your quality of service delivery to be, and so that the student can come alongside and manage to rise to that standard but not impair on that service delivery. And if you have productivity standards, you need to really be realistic, because you don't want to take away the joy of being an OT because you want to give back, but your productivity standards are so high that you don't have the support within the department to be successful at doing that. Part of it, I mean, we love what we do as OTs, so don't add something as a burden if you feel like you have to do the commitment now. I'm not dissuading you for taking students. I'm just wanting you to be sure that the timing is right so that you can manage them effectively and still be successful with your clients and with your workload. And then know that you have a fieldwork educator that is available to talk to you. Beyond that, it's the one at the school. Who's the coordinator? Who's managing that? And how can you go talk to them to let them know that you're interested in taking a student, or if you have a problem or you don't understand something, being able to talk to that coordinator makes a difference for you sometimes. All right. And the types of students, so that you know, because we talk about fieldwork, and a lot of times I'm always focused on the level 2 fieldwork students, but I'm also focused on the level 1 fieldwork students. In the discussion that we're having, it'll often reference what's the standard for the level 2, but know that level 1s always precede those level 2s, and they're equally as important and a priority, because each level 1 student experience builds on the previous experience, so that by the time they get to their level 2 fieldwork, the combination of those first experiences prepare them for how to manage and work with clients, and to work with supervisors, and to be able to deliver service. So in the level 1s, there are a couple different types of level 1s. Depending on your facility and what the liability issues, you need to find out whether or not you can have students that are hands-on as well as those that are observation only. So you need to find out from your department whether or not it's an observation only, so that you don't think that you can let them handle and manage the client, and then you find out that there's a problem because they shouldn't be doing that, because it's a liability issue. The students are excited with either one of those level ones. And if you have a level one that's observation only, what you're going to do in a lot of that is help them understand the application, as Derek had said, of what they're learning in the classroom and what it is in real life. Now, I'm going to do this little rabbit trail about that. Please, I'm begging you, whether you have level ones or level twos. In the classroom, the students have to learn all of the foundational information on how to do documentation, on how to work with caregivers. It's the best practice from the book, because they have to get that embedded in their brains. Yet we know when we stand in front of that classroom, as soon as we release them to the field, they're going to come back and say, well, that's not how it's done in real life. So help them understand why it's not done that way in real life. And what I say to them is, who has their license? Well, my supervisor does. Did they learn the foundation beforehand? Well, yes. And have they figured out the shortcuts between what they learned in class and now they're in the field? Do they know the shortcuts so that they know each week what they were doing, or each session what they're doing with the clients? Well, yes. So where are you going to be able to demonstrate you have that knowledge? It's through the classroom and the assignments, through the work that they're doing with you and any any of the assignments they do in the field. But they don't fully understand, nor should they, because they're not at that level of experience yet, why we have these shortcuts in the field. They're not shortcuts because we don't want to do the work. They're the shortcuts because we know how to better manage our time, and we already have that clinical reasoning in our brain. Students are still learning that. So if you can help them understand that difference between in the field, and if they say to you, well, that's not what we learned in class, help them understand why it's different. I think that's really key and important. Do you agree? And it saves us a lot of challenge in the classroom, because sometimes students get the wrong message, and then they think that the person that's teaching them doesn't really know what's happening in the real world. And we actually do, because many of us are still practicing. We're just trying to get students to have that knowledge base so that they can apply the shortcuts. So that's the thing with the level ones. The differences between OTA and OTR programs is that the number of hours that are required for a level one student. It's less hours for an OTA student, more hours for the OTR. So whatever facility you're working with, academic institution you're working with, find out from them how many hours the student would need to be with you and how that format is. Sometimes it's 1 week, sometimes it's one time a week over the course of a certain number of weeks. But find that, and they'll be able to share that with you. As far as the level 2 standards, the students finish a total of 12 weeks rotations and in a full-time position. The OTAs do it between an 8 to 10 week rotation, again, depending on what academic institution it is. And the full-time can range from 32 to 40 hours. It's based on full-time for your facility. So if you work 4 10-hour days, that's the standard. Okay. If you're in the school setting and you're working 8-hour days, that's the standard. In order to begin any field work, in order to become a fieldwork setting, there's a lot of front-end work that goes into that. Now, those of you at Bayview and Hopkins, or any facility that's already taking the level 2 students, you have already developed a student manual, or should have, that addresses the different learning objectives. You will be getting the learning objectives from the school for the things and the standards we want for our students, but then you will also should have those for your site, and they should be site-specific. So the objectives that are the standards by AOTA and ACODE are generally general in nature, so that any setting can meet those standards regardless of what that setting is. Because if we sat down there and talked together, we'd find that we all looked at things just a little bit differently. What you do is come up with what you want the students to be able to be successful in completing from the clinical site. And if you go to human resources and pull a job description for an entry-level clinician, that will give you the foundation for the different things that you're going to need in order to plan your objectives. I'm looking at my notes. I apologize for that, because I'm afraid I've forgotten something here. No, I'm right where it is. What I wanted to tell you in relation to this is that when I said that next week is the application, I will be giving you the handout today, and we'll talk about it a little more when we get further into this discussion. But one of the hardest things as a fieldwork educator is figuring out how to objectively measure the fieldwork performance evaluation. And do you give them a 3? Do you give them a 2? Do you give them a 5? You know, how do you rate it? Even though the standards are explained, in application it's really challenging. What I'm going to share with you more in detail so that you can practice it next week is a strategy that has been developed with Sinai Hospital. Lauren Deaver, I don't know if you know her, but she and her team took it, and it's a template that anyone can use. We presented it at the MOTA conference, and I'm real excited about this. From the perspective of fieldwork educators, it's a front-end load of work in terms of coming up with your objectives, but it gives you an objective measure of what are the simple patients that the students should be completely managing by the end of the rotation. What are the moderate, and what percentage of them should they be successfully managing? But we're going to do that as more mechanics, and I'll give you the details later. So for the next rotation that we do, because by the time you're done working or thinking through this different way of looking at your objectives, you can objectively measure whether your student's being successful or not, and sit down and show them the document and say, listen, by week 6 you were supposed to be achieving these specific items, and if you're not, there's a problem. And if you are and you're ahead and you're doing things that I had planned for you at week 9, you don't have to wonder, is it me? Am I going too slow? Am I going too fast? Are they getting the knowledge that they need? And I wanted to introduce it to you, not because I'm pushing it on you, but I think that it'll just help you broaden and come up with your own way of expanding your objectivity and evaluating student performance. One of the things when you're considering the commitment and what's available to you is you really have to figure out what your timetable is. Now, those of you that have been working with students for a while, do you find that there's a front-end load of you have to take the time to talk and work with the students? Would you agree with that? Now, do you designate specific time in the course of the week to do that, or is it impromptu? So you let them know, okay? Mm-hmm.
One of us would do the introduction, get them familiar with the whole hospital, like the first day or so, and then, kind of do more on the second day.
Mm-hmm. So it's a steady, regular.
Pretty much they're really doing some things that all that first week. Then after that, certification, that kind of thing. We do have a very specific what we, sometimes they're very strict with it, sometimes.
And there's some flexibility, but students need to learn that as well. You were going to say, do you set aside?
I had a regular
And that's what I have found when I've talked with supervisors. If they're starting to see that there's a problem in working with their student, oftentimes it's the lack of that structured time to be able to sit and talk with their student and find out how things are progressing, allow time for asking questions. Because in mentoring the student, you're trying to get them to be self-sufficient and independent in their thinking. But a lot of times in the beginning, they're really hesitant to ask questions, and they're hesitant to say anything because they're not sure where they fit in the scheme of things and how much voice they actually have. And they are absolutely concerned that they're going to do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. So a lot of times they won't speak, which makes them look like they're not interested, as opposed to, or that they're afraid, and they're not afraid, they're just unsure. So if they know they can meet with you on a regular basis, that makes a difference in their willingness to take risks because they'll be able to process things with you. With that said, you need to make sure that your schedule is going to allow that time each week and figure out how to do it. Because the flip side of that is, yes, there needs to be flexibility, but if every week something interferes or it's rushed, then that student, again, doesn't feel like they have that grounding to feel comfortable at taking risks because they're not sure when they're going to get to talk to somebody about how they did or what. Processing as you go is absolutely fine, and that's how a lot of people do it, and it doesn't work, but that structured time seems to make a difference both for the fieldwork educator as well as for that student. You need to make sure that you complete that midterm evaluation and allow time for that. OTs, it's at 6 weeks. OTAs, it's at 4 weeks. It's right smack dab in the middle of that rotation. And that's an opportunity. How do I make this sound right? If the student is struggling at nailing those objectives that are at their midterm, that's going to be something that you need to sit down and realistically talk to that student about so that you can get them close to it by week 7. Because if you keep going, well, maybe they'll progress, and then it's week 9 and 10 and they still haven't gotten there, that is really late in the rotation to be telling a student you need to change and modify something. So use that 6-week point also as just in your head of objectively determining, are they where you want them to be? Are they getting the 2s? And I'll talk about it again some more because it's not a letter grade of A, B, C, and D. It's a 1, 2, 3, and 4. They try to translate it to an A, B, C, or D. It doesn't work that way. It's where are their skills? And we'll talk about that again some more. But use that as an opportunity to really evaluate how your student's progressing and where there might be some red flags or concerns. Even if they're progressing quickly, what's that going to mean over the course of 12 weeks for you? If they're advanced, how are you going to manage that? Because they're equally as challenging if they're advanced as well as if they are challenged and not developing where you want them to be. And then please make sure that for the final evaluation, you make sure that both parties sign. The fieldwork performance evaluation cannot be processed if it's missing signatures. And that seems like a simple thing, but we get busy and it happens. And then you'll get an email from me saying, here's the front page of the FWPE, could you please sign it? Or the students will say, when are we going to process? I'll process it as soon as I have the FWPE. So please pay attention to that because that one makes the difference of being able to process it or not.
I also wanted to ask, for those of you who do level 1s, do you do a midterm evaluation? It's not required typically, but does anyone do?
See, I encourage even with the level 1s, it always seems like a hard thing to do. But with the level 1s, I really encourage people, if they can plug that into their time at the midterm to do it, because that's the time, even if they're not doing hands-on, you can see whether they're starting to develop clinical reasoning and application. Because then they have to actually talk to you about what they're seeing and what they've been able to do. So then we go into the student manual, and every facility should have one, even if it's just 3 pages. I don't care. I mean, I hope it's more than 3 pages, but it should be able to define to the student what their resources are, what their expectations include, what are the policies and procedures, and what things they need to know in order to be safe in your environment and to be at code and level for what you're wanting them to be able to do. There should be an organizational chart so they have an understanding of how your facility works. If you can give them any kinds of samples in there of what you want them to be able to follow, tell them that it is not a rubric that they have to follow by the letter. It is an example of what it is they need to be able to do. And let them know if you have an assignment for them for fieldwork, because they need to know that you have expectations. And again, for the level 2s, as far as I'm concerned, every student should be doing some type of project to give back to the facility for the time and effort that you're putting in from them. So when you think of the projects, think of something that would be a benefit to you or to your clients, but you just never have time to be able to do it. And I can guarantee you the students will jump on it and they come up with some brilliant projects. I just love reading the projects that they send in. So with that said, I did have a couple things here in order to ask you to share. In terms of your fieldwork manuals, for those of you that already have them in play, is there anything that you think is key that each setting should consider and make sure that it's not overlooked? Updated according to standards and procedures?
Well, we'll have the student and we'll look at go through it.
Saying I've supervised level 2s too. I'm sitting here thinking about some of the times this is really dumb, but when you don't update it and then they follow the old protocol, they don't know they're doing something wrong. And you look at them like, well, why are you doing that? And then you realize it's in the manual. They're following the protocols, but I just didn't switch it. Isn't this heat ready to put you to sleep? I'm like up here sweltering. I can only imagine sitting out there having to look at pictures and listen. Let's all curl up and take a cat nap. The other thing I would ask you to consider is that if you have a fieldwork manual and it's already electronic, decide whether you want a hard copy or electronic. But consider whether or not your facility should be sending it to the students prior to their field placement. Okay? And ask them to be accountable to reviewing that before they come through the door. You can go over the key points with them. You can have them sit there and do it if that's part of the protocols that your facility has as part of the orientation and training. But if you send them information ahead of time telling them that that's what you want them to do, they will do it. And if they don't, that's a red flag. Okay? But if they understand what you want to, and in the manual oftentimes it's the terminology, the HIPAA regs, the safety issues, safety regs, and they can't hear that enough because they're learning. They need to understand that. So the more you're able to give them that information, and if they don't have the worry of trying to do everything right that first day, they can sit and go through it with less stress if they get it ahead of time.
And I also think about it in terms a lot of students are still asking about working during level 2s.
Oh.
And, if they get a manual beforehand and they can see a schedule, it might help them to understand that it's not a great idea to work during your level 2. That it is very intense, that you're going to be doing a lot of outside of the actual as well. So jump-starting and it's usually here in the manual. It's not a great idea. You're going to be very, very busy. But that sometimes helps too.
Well, and it does. I have a young friend that's at a different university, and she can't wait to come back home because it's out of state, because her sweetheart's here, okay, and fieldwork's here, and she can't wait to see her sweetheart while she's doing fieldwork. I said, oh, child, tell your sweetheart that you will see him the weekend before, and then he needs to be very patient for the next 12 weeks because it's just not happening. And I said, you've believed me everything else I've told you. It's not come true. It's all come true. I said, so tell your this is a test. If he really loves you, he can wait for 12 weeks. Okay? But it's funny, you don't know what they're thinking or how they perceive it. So the more knowledge you can give them ahead of time, the better they will be prepared to come through the doors. Because the truth of the matter is they want to be successful. See, I feel so silly saying this to you. I can see there's a lot of our alums here, and they know you want to be successful, you want to do the right thing, and you want to do it in such a way that whoever the fieldwork educator is, they want to have those Towson students back again, or their alum students back again. So moving from that, here...
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I've also seen in Fieldwork manual, last semester was the first time I was the faculty person for a level 2, but they talked a lot about what students can do to cope. It's stressful, it's busy, be emotional. So give some resources about what you do to kind of cope with your day. You talk to, don't forget to do some fun things. You need a little bit of time, maybe on a weekend to watch your favorite TV show, something. But I think if it's in a manual, students might feel less guilty for those things. And they might actually take it as self-care versus that idea of I'm procrastinating by watching whatever they're binging on that day. So there are different things you can put in the manuals. It doesn't have to be everything, just the policies and procedures and schedules and those kind of things.
And they really want to do you well. That's the thing that pleases me. But the thing I tell the students is, if we have a placement, that fieldwork educator wants you there. They wouldn't have volunteered to take you. They want you there, and they're going to do their best for you to be able to learn what you need to be an entry-level therapist as long as you put in the effort to do that. And that seems, I hope, to help them shape their perspective and be less anxious because they know somebody wants them there and wants to work with them. That makes a bit of a difference as well. So the hardest thing as a fieldwork educator is that you're shifting from being that clinician to an actual educator. So you've got that dual hat running there. So you still have to do patient care, service delivery, talk with caregivers, but now you also have to take the time to be able to educate that student as to the whys and the hows and the whens and the wheres. You do the service delivery and give them the opportunity to go from that first week totally dependent state to that 10th week able to carry your caseload state. Okay, so the things you need to consider are the transition into this new role. And this is where you need to be insightful. And obviously, based on your candy selections, you know, you have different personality traits of your own. If you're someone who is, you know, fast-moving and energetic and ready to go, hitting the ground at 8 in the morning and rocking it till 9 at night, and you have a student who's more laid back and slower moving, there's a discord there. But it's your responsibility as a fieldwork educator to really reflect on, well, how do I reach that student and get them to the level? Because you're not going to change somebody that's laid back to being hyper. I could go around the room and we could divide between laid back and hyper, and that's who we are. But you can help them understand the speed and the time management and the organization and the processes that go into managing a daily routine to their way of managing it. Does that make sense? But you can only be effective with that if you recognize how you manage time, how you manage your space, what your expectations are, what you want to mentor. What do you think are the key components that every student should walk away understanding so that that legacy continues in the patient care in the future? So know that, and know that you're modeling the professional behaviors and you're giving the knowledge to future clinicians. Now, with that said, be aware of your own time management and organization. And if you're asking them something that you yourself are not doing, we'll include that in a dialogue. Because students shouldn't be judging whether, you know, you're the hired employee. They don't know all the different things that you're having to manage that they are unaware of. But that can be part of a dialogue if you see there's a disconnect there. And you need to have time to manage not just your patient care, but you need to have time to plan for your student because they are your patient, so to speak. If you don't have the time to think about what you need to do or what extra goes into with that shadow that you now have, look at that typo. You need to have time to be able to get the lesson for the student as well. We already talked about the regular meetings, but in a day-to-day basis, being able to meet with them for what the day's work is going to be is important. Have them get there early. If you don't have to be there early if they need to do patient chart review. Let them know the caseload that they're going to be having and tell them what your expectations are, so touch base with them. And make sure that they have the opportunity to observe with other therapists. You want to facilitate that interprofessional experience so that they know how to collaborate, how to engage, how to express ideas that might be different than their colleagues. And then help build the student's schedule so that because they have management skills, they've had lives, so they know how to manage themselves. They're industrious and hardworking students because they're high-level achievers, but sometimes this is a whole new thing. Figuring out how to manage a caseload and what to do with your time is a whole new venture, and for students, it's often very overwhelming. And for those of us experienced, it's often still overwhelming. So
Students feel lost. I remember having level twos that, you know, in their first week, they would just sit in the office and stare. I need you to go. I don't care what it is, but you're freaking me out.
stare.
Yeah. So that's, you know, sort of, again, that manual and scheduling is kind of making students aware because they want to learn, so they're just looking at you as that fountain of knowledge at all times.
And to them, yeah. So what your responsibility then as a fieldwork educator is figuring out how you're going to go and take that student from observation that first week, now I'm talking level 2s, or hands-on level 1s, observation, then they assist with therapy and treatment, and then they provide the treatment under your close supervision, or when they engage with caregivers under your close supervision. One of the things that gets me so tickled, because you should be getting letters from the students, introductory letters from the students, and then their goals for the semester. Now, it is a cheat sheet because I give them the information from which to pull some of it. And one of the things that always gets me tickled is always in that first week, they are going to learn where all the materials go in the gym so that they can retrieve them and put them back on behalf of themselves and others. I love the goal, but it just gets me so tickled because I'm sharing that so that you can see they really want to do the right thing and be helpful. They're just not really clear on what that is. So the better you're able to help them know that and what your expectations are, the better they're going to follow through on what it is you're doing at your standards and then execute and follow through with what you want in terms of patient care. Does that make sense? But they are cute. Students are cute. Can't help it. All right. And now what I wanted to share with you for your consideration is what are the principles under for learning as an adult? It's very different than when you're a little kidlet or you're trying to learn something new. And as we go through it, stop and think about how you yourself learn. And that doesn't mean your student is going to do it in exactly the same way, but we'll share some of this about what are learning styles as an adult here in a minute so you can see the wide variation because no one does it the same way. But according to Webster, it's to gain knowledge and understanding of a skill of study, instruction, or experience. So it's fundamental, right? It's the basics. It's not application. It's just learning what it is. So prior to the start of fieldwork, the students complete this data form, and they should be able to describe in that data form their preferred learning style. This is information that should be helpful to you because if you have someone, and we'll talk about this in a minute as well, that's a visual learner, they're going to learn better if they see things. If they're an auditory learner, they're going to do better if you give them the verbal direction. As they're a kinesthetic learner, they need a little bit of everything in order to be successful. So if you take that into consideration, that way, again, if there's a mismatch, and if you're a visual learner and you think everybody gets it from reading, and now you have someone who doesn't learn that way, well, then you'll know how to modify things in order for them to still achieve it without you getting frustrated and going, look, it's written down. Except when they look at it and they're an auditory learner, all that stuff is a whole bunch of overwhelming letters on a page because they can't make sense of it until someone actually says something to them. But it's the different learning styles, and it's how people learn. And there's a lot of literature and a lot of theories, and it's like anything else. There's a bazillion of them. It's like backsides. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody has a theory, right? So figure out your own and which one works for you, much like you do the models in therapy, the models and theories that you use in applying your therapy. Figure out what works for you and apply it. And then modify for the little bumps in the road that come along or the little differences, but at least you know why you're doing it and why it should be successful in the approach that you're taking. So the 4 stages of adult learning is dualism, pluralism, relativism, and commitment. I guess they couldn't say commitivism. So it's a lot of isms there. So in dualism, they look at it as black and white, right, wrong. They expect you to have all of the answers. And then they begin to discover that there's more than one answer to any question. So they start to find those gray shades. And then they begin to realize that it's not just their opinions. And we talk about, other cultures and considering what others do. But in the learning, they begin to realize that there are more opinions, and all of them may have value given the way you look at it. And then finally is the commitment in that the student, or not the student, the learner feels more confident and understands that they need to see the bigger picture. So that's a progression, and if you think about your own way of learning, you're going to see that you pretty much follow that progression as well. First, it's everything mom and dad say, and then it's what friends say, and then there's a bigger world, and now as an independent learner and an independent individual, the world is yours to figure out how and what to do in order to navigate it. So, with auditory learners, they learn by hearing, and they retain a large portion of what they hear. So hearing something there is the best way for them to learn. So having them do things on tape or listening to lectures or having you give verbal directions is going to make a difference for them. One of the things to do is to rephrase questions or key points. And sometimes that re-auditorization of asking them what did you hear? You say it. Then what did you hear? They give it back. That's hearing it the second time. And then you restate it. It's like, yeah, that's correct. This is what we're doing. So then they hear it the 3 times, and it's registered and retained. So they, again, you're going to see that most of them do well with the one-to-one sessions. And then they also stay engaged because of the way you do the pitch to the voice or the different stimulation that you give in the auditory system. So just be aware of that and apply all that lovely auditory sensory stuff that you all know about, right? So the other one is the visual learner. Again, large component of what they do is by seeing it or reading it. So they love the graphs, the diagrams, the pictures, and the charts. And most of the time, they're able to visualize it afterwards and pull that information back because it goes, they've registered, they retain it, but they picture it in their heads and find it in the repository and bring it back. Auditory learners do the same thing, but they're doing it from the ability to hear. So they hear and they think about, now what did they say just before this? So it's the same way of learning, it's just which system is the dominant system in which they go to pull the information. And there are different types of visual learners. So there's the one that's the analytical, so they like the printed word before they want the pictures. The global processes the pictures before the printed word. And again, why is this important? Because sometimes they will jump to conclusions and you go, well, where did they come up with that? Well, because they were looking at the big part and didn't pay attention to the little part. So what works best for these types of students? Again, handouts, pictures and charts, modeling, and showing demonstrations of what's expected. You need to be clear on what you expect, because the more clear you are, the better they understand, and then they'll be successful, and the confidence will grow, and they will be less hesitant they will be more actively engaged and more willing to take risks. So if they're unsure, the way they manage it is by they're not immobilized, but they don't take risks and they don't engage. They wait for you to direct and tell them what to do. So pay attention to it, and that will help facilitate their learning and more self-sufficiency. The tactile kinesthetic learner is the hands-on learner, and if I took a check in here, how many people think they're kinesthetic learners? I mean, it used to be visual learners were like the number one learner in the room, but I'm finding more and more that it's kinesthetic learners. So they're hands-on learners, and their key strengths are the motor learning and the motor coordination. So again, they're the ones that you can give them the textbooks, you can give them the articles to read, but what they really, and you can describe verbally and tell them what to do, and then you give them the opportunity and they go for it, and they have a good time being able to experiment, explore, and apply. So the groups that they're really excellent with working in are the different behavioral and community practice groups. So with what we do in one of the level ones at the Institute for Wellbeing, that's exactly where we're trying to hit the students in their level ones to be able to apply those skills and be able to facilitate groups in working with individuals. So you've got to know yourself and your learning style, but you also have to know your student and their learning style. But the other thing you need to realize, and this is hard, and I have tried to figure this one out, and all I keep coming up with is, in the classroom, we can talk about all the different types of reasoning that there are. We can give them all kinds of examples. We can show them all kinds of videos. But the truth of the matter is that the fieldwork student will not fully develop clinical reasoning until they get into the field and actually have to put it all together. So, good, bad, or ugly, it's up to the fieldwork educator to actually be the ones that fully facilitate clinical reasoning and the integration of those skills. Does that make sense? Would you agree? No one disagrees? Do you agree? Okay. So that's a good thing. So when you're working with the students, you need to be able to give them some assistance to develop a picture of what the person looks like before OT, because they don't know how to think of the pre. They see in the immediate and the now. And even though they know to take an occupational profile, up until the point they go into the field, the occupational profile is a list of words and interviews and surveys that they've done within. They're a brother, they're a sister, they're in the second grade, they're in college, they're an older individual in their leisure and their interests, all of which is important, and they grasp this is the descriptors. Working with a client with some type of a need, oftentimes they can't realize where the person came from in order to better able to help figure out where they're trying to get them to go. They're still thinking in terms of silos. And they need to understand, the better they understand the philosophy of the department, the better they'll be able to apply the knowledge that they come in with, that they bring with them. Otherwise, if they don't understand the departmental philosophy, they've got no foundation on which to build things. The other piece is they need to know the precautions with the patient's diagnoses or the expectations of the facility. Because, and then I'll say this other one, but have them review the patient charts. Because sometimes things happen, And students do not mean anything malicious, but they're growing up in a world where they have all kinds of personal devices, and they're used to using them this fast, and they can find anything on the planet through these devices. So sometimes they'll be in the middle of therapy and they may take a picture of something they shouldn't have without thinking. And if they aren't aware that that is a protocol that will get them kicked out from their facility, it will not register as a problem, because to them, they've been doing it all of their lives since they got their first cell phone, taking pictures. They won't post it. They know not to post it on media. They know that. That's ingrained in them. But they don't realize sometimes that when they're taking the picture to show the patient what they were doing, and they're seeing it as a tool to help the patient identify whatever it is that they're doing, or the little video vignette, and then they leave, they don't realize they've just walked out with personal information and they're at risk of losing their placement. So help them understand the safety, not just in the safety management of the patient, but the HIPAA requirements and the standards that will keep them managing the environment, the patient, and themselves in such a way that they don't put their field replacement at risk. And then remember, if you would please, that the OT students can perform the evaluations and develop those long and short-term goals, but the OTA students can only review the goals and then develop the possible approaches to address the goals. Sometimes OTA students have been put in a position in facilities where they're asked to do evaluations, and then they, as students, don't know what to do, because they know they're not supposed to do it because they've heard it from class, but depending on the setting, they're being told that they can do it. So just be sensitive to sometimes they don't understand. In our last field work, I was getting a phone call because they were questioning how billing was being done, because they thought that some, more minutes were being billed than were actually being performed, but they didn't understand the billing procedures. I knew exactly what the billing was that was being done. It was being done as 50-minute hours, 4 units, right? So I knew what was going on. They didn't understand it, so they were afraid they were doing something fraudulent in the delivery of care. And then that put them at risk in how to relate and collaborate with their supervisor, because they weren't sure if the supervisor was telling them the right thing to do. So they are ultra vigilant to being ethical and to doing the right thing. And sometimes they just don't have the big picture, like I said before, and you need to help them understand that.
One thing that I've seen recently, level ones, that's where I look at, is that sometimes students also forget that they've had lives outside of the team. I've had students who come to me and say, I was trying to think of what I would do as an OT. I'm like, okay, well, what would you do as a person, though? You're still a person. What common sense can you apply that also goes along with students' goals? So just kind of making sure students are still aware that it's not always the OT brain. It's helpful. But sometimes you have to also think about common sense. If they have some sort of precaution, students like, I don't know, they move their leg that way. Think about, okay, is there a pin there? Move that way, is it going to fall out? Probably. Kind of common sense.
I always thought OTs were the foundation of common sense. Do you? I've been fascinated my whole career that people have paid me all this money over my lifetime in order just to be practical and to play for a living, because it's just fun, right? So it's common sense and play, and they pay me money to do it. I mean, I would pay to do it, but nobody's asked me to, so I gladly take that paycheck. But it's a fascination to me that common sense rules supreme. So the final food for thought of this is that you need to realize that you as the teacher need to listen carefully to your student, because they desire, how do you think the students see you? Let me ask that question first. How do you think students, when they cross the threshold, are going to see you? What do they think of their supervisors? Say what? And what do you think, in what way though, what do you think it means?
Real talk. Real talk is okay.
She's trying to be polite. I love it. It's okay. We understand what you're saying. And that is really tough. So what do you do with those entitled students? Because you will get them. That seems to be prevalent in society today, regardless of the age. So what did you do?
Take a seat back. Take a day.
Take a breath.
Take a breath.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to sit down with that student. Kind of remind why they
Absolutely.
remind them that who they in your student.
Mm-hmm.
And what person will
And how many years have you been taking students? And there it is. The bottom line, it goes back to what I was saying before. They can come on with every attitude under the sun, but we know what we want our OTs to be like. We know what entry level looks like, right? We're the ones with the licenses. And if they're not going to follow the routines and the habits and the mandates that the facility calls for, well, I don't want them to be in trouble. But if they need a wake-up call, you sit them down and you have a serious wake-up call, because you are not doing it. You are doing it as mentors, but it is not at their beck and call. And you help them understand that. And here's the truth of it. They can come in with a feeling of entitlement. And that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with them. It's just the way that they've experienced life. But in the real world, as clinicians, having to be responsible for the care of someone else and fully responsible for that care as an individual, the best thing you can do is sit them down and give them a reality check and help them understand how to make that mental shift, even though they may have never heard it before. But I had a student, and she would flash every thought across her brain. You could see it. I said to her one day, do you have like one of those teletape things where you just telegraph? Could you do anything more stupid than that? I mean, it was like, you knew exactly what she was thinking. She said, I didn't know I was doing it. So let me give you a clue. You are telegraphing it when you're talking with your colleagues. You're telegraphing it when you're working with your clients. I could just write the letters. And she didn't believe me. And she made this face, and I told her exactly what she was thinking at the time she did. She's like, how did you know that? I said, I'm telling you, you are telegraphing. So the biggest part of that 12-week rotation was helping her be aware when she was doing it and figure out a way to stop it, because it was going to cause her to fail and to be unsuccessful as a clinician if every time she worked with a caregiver or somebody else she didn't agree with, that she would make these faces, So it was the best. She's a lovely clinician now. She's wonderful. She's living life and loving her kids that she's working with, and still is learning not to telegraph. But she's come a long way since then. So that's the kindest thing you can do, but it's the hardest thing as a fieldwork educator to get yourself nerved up to do, which is why you take a breath, take a day, formulate in your brain how you're going to manage that type of behavior or attitude. Anybody else have something they want to share? Right. And that's what goes back to what I said to you earlier. You're spot on with that. We can only get them to a certain level. Once they cross the threshold to your facility, that's where the real growth and confidence and maturity begins. And you've got them in your hands they're your putty. They're the dough. They're the craft that you're creating. And they're not your patient, but they are in the sense that you're managing their care and their opportunity to learn and excel and be successful at the goals that they have for themselves or that you've established for them. So a lot of times you can think of them as, a high-functioning client, because they really are, but they still need some tweaking, right? Yes, ma'am.
Work experience required to get into the program?
There's a certain number of hours that they're required to do actually in the field of occupational therapy. Y'all remember what that was? Is it 400 or how many? 40? Well, it should be a whole bunch. There should be a bunch of zeros after it. 80? 480. That's for the fieldwork twos. No, but I'm talking about to get into the program.
For Towson, it's 30.
30 is. To get in? Oh, I have to talk to
You
somebody.
have to have
It
30
needs to be a
hours
lot
of
more than that.
service, actual hands-on
Yeah.
service.
And it's not babysitting, it's actual service. They work, many of them, and that is another thing that is a constant push me pull you, is that they often are working while they're going to school because they have debts and such that they have to pay, and the faculty are constantly saying don't work. So they have a lot of life experiences depending on the age. You know, if they're the master's level students, they often come in with a previous degree in a previous career. So many of them are.
Right.
But again, each of them are different, because I've often found that, and this is not a slam against teachers, but for a teacher to shift from the mindset of a teacher to an OT is often hard, because it's so similar in nature, but different. So there's certain work skills that when I've worked with them, I see there's a shift. But yeah, I agree. When they've had more life experiences, it's easier. But the problem is they still have to change whatever their previous mindset was to that of being an OT. They're coming in. I mean, they're competent young people. They know things. They're capable and they're able. They just haven't figured out the last bit of that OT brain. We've twisted it as much as we can, but it's up to you all as fieldwork educators to get them into that next step.
Think about it as priority. You know, when you're in your academic part of your program, priority is the assignments, getting the readings done, but then the priority changes. It's, you know, how do I start thinking about taking care of patients versus getting everything done for myself? I still have to get my whatever assignments I have for school done or plan for the next day, but that planning really needs to be about the person too, not just I'm going to do motion or this group, or, you know, that activity. And you might see that when they're talking about, like, oh, I'm off next Friday because it's my dog's birthday, and you should really let me off, because if not, you don't dog person.
Do you say every time someone says that a student's taking off and make a face? I'm sorry, that's telegraphing. That just drives me crazy when they take off and for some reason. And I'm preaching like, you know when fieldwork is 2 years from now. Do not go to a wedding. Do not get pregnant. Do not, have an illness. Do not get in a car accident. There is nothing you're going to do. Well, of course you did. No. No. I actually, in order to help fieldwork educators, I almost think I'm going to start saying, because we haven't done this, but I think I'm going to start asking when students want to be off. See, it's up to you whether you want to let them be off if you feel like it's a legitimate request. But I'd sort of like to know when that's happening so that I know how many of those extra days they're using up from the tail end, or how chronic a problem it is, because I have no clue. And I don't think it's right when you're, as a fieldwork educator, if people are sick, you can't help it, but from choices. As a fieldwork educator, you're donating your time and dedicating it to them over that 12-week period, and you often may have another student coming, so there's very little downtime between the first and the second student. So when you have that lag going in to the next group, I think that's unfair. So I tend to be a hard case and set those boundaries tight, like, okay, but what are you going to do to make this up? Because you can't just, not show up. But it is a challenge. So
I still think about kind of switching thoughts there. If you take students from different schools, Towson, we changed recently for a BSMS. Now they're doing their level 2s at the end versus when they would do it between their bachelor's and master's program. Some schools still do it that way. And talking about maturity, I remember having Towson students when I was a full-time clinician. You're so immature, I don't know what to do with you. And I think that sometimes it's that level of education they've had so far. Maybe if they're just done their bachelor's program and they do their level 2s and they're going back for their intensive master's part, it's a different sort of way to approach. It's a different way to work with the students versus those students who have the program and they do both sets and then they do their level 2s.
And there is some maturity in aging, but if you have that pop into your head of why are you so young and immature? Take a step back and make sure that's not coming from you, but it's really that the student is acting in a way that isn't age appropriate. Sometimes it's just lack of knowledge, and then they get embarrassed, and then they get awkward because they're embarrassed. So you need to just kind of feel that out and talk to them, which again is why I'm all for these regular meetings and talking through things. Anyone else want to add?
The anxiety too. We've been talking a lot about in our department about the level of anxiety that our people growing up have, and sometimes that anxiety kind of forces them. They stop, don't do the things that they would normally do. They don't take risks. They don't ask questions, and it might seem like pressure because of that. So, going back to what I said about how to cope, how to make sure that you're still taking time for yourself, sort of all applies together.
Take time for yourselves, too, through that. So here are some resources for the Fieldwork Educator. And the one that's the best on that list right there, well, first is, you see what I put on there first, Academic Fieldwork Coordinator. All right, you can call us anytime. That's not the best on the page. The best on that page is the Essential Guide to Occupational Therapy Fieldwork. It is a manual. I almost brought it, but then I was so lazy I didn't want to carry that hefty weight. But it's a manual that's about that big, and just about everything you need to know about fieldwork is in that manual. So if it's not something you're already using, it's through AOTA. Find it, because it absolutely is a wonderful source. Going back to the resources with the Fieldwork Educator, there's the Academic Fieldwork Coordinator, but then the other thing you need to know as well is that you have a faculty member assigned to the students for their course of study during fieldwork. So you actually have supports from two different arenas coming from, and this is whether it's Towson or another school, so that you can talk first level with faculty. Faculty talks with the Fieldwork Educator, but you have different tiers to be able to, are things real serious to the point that we may be in jeopardy here, or is there just a little glitch? So what can we work about, or what do we need to change? The flip side of that is the student also has access to that faculty person as well as the Academic Fieldwork Coordinator. So we feel like we try to give support to both sides so that if anything is going good, bad, or ugly, we can help support whatever it is that you need while offering fieldwork to the students. So, are you ready for a break? Want a break? I don't know what time it is.
About
6:30. Want to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll keep going. Jump up and down. Do the twist. This is how I class too. I just keep going and I can't stop. Did you hear me tell you you're doing a great job? Good. All right. So the next thing that we're going to shift into is talking about preparedness. So before we start looking at that information, what do you think that means to be prepared when you're going to be a fieldwork educator? An attitude check, being up to date on everything, absolutely, or feeling, at least being able to pretend like you are, right? I was told early in my career that I didn't need to know everything. I just needed to be one day smarter than the population I was working with. I lived by that because, as a new graduate, you think you have to know everything. But then I realized I only have to be prepared one day ahead for each thing, thinking of the future, but one day at a time. All right, so any other thoughts about preparedness? Because the next slides are going to give you all the answers. And I keep asking because I want you to be interactive, but I also want to be sensitive to the fact that you're probably tired. Yes?
Also probably trying to do some reading on new articles keep up with this.
And that is true because they are learning best practice, current practice, particularly in research. Yes, ma'am?
I would say, like, if you're reaching out to, if you know who is going to be or supervisor, reaching out to them, one or look up the company in general and find out what their specialties are, so that you know what populations you're likely to run into.
And what you're saying is that from the student's perspective, checking out the company they're working for, I always tell them go to the website and have some knowledge. Know who the supervisor is and reach out to the supervisor for extra learning, for any materials that might be necessary for prepping. And when they send you these letters that they're introduction letters, by all means, let them know what to do to prepare because they need to know what they need to know. They've been exposed to it, and I'm telling you, I'm going to tell you these two things. Those of you that are in FISTIS, and I apologize to previous students, but one of the things that drives me absolutely nuts, and I don't know how to fix it, is that they always say that they didn't learn the transfers, and, now I forgot what the second one is, but there's two things that they never get exposure to, and I know full well that they not only get exposure, but they have to pass comps in both of those things. So they couldn't get through the course if they didn't. What they actually are meaning to say is that they didn't get enough exposure that they felt competent to be successful in a clinic setting. So if you hear a student say, well, we didn't learn that, then you can say to them, well, you're not in class that day. But in seriousness, you won't say that. What you'll say is, I suspect you got exposure because that's baseline for any student going out into the field. You probably just needed more practice. But the point is, if you send them that information, the terminology was the other thing. Give them your terminology. Tell them what type of transfers they need to know. Let them know what kinds of behavioral cases they might be working with and what type of things they should practice or review before coming. Range of motion, manual muscle testing, whatever the key components are, because that's your expectation. They cross the threshold, not being able to fully integrate and apply it, but have the knowledge that when they see it, they can start to apply the information effectively. Make sense?
I know our students coming on the acute side of teams. We have a list, like camp, and they all have a different lab, a different OT and or the expertise in that, and they actually go
Process. See, that's great. So they know it ahead of time, but then they get a review that's solid, and that makes a difference for them. As I said, they want to succeed. They just need to know what it is they need to know in order to be successful. So the reason you need to prepare is that it's going to maximize that learning experience for the student, but at the same time, it's going to maximize your confidence or ability in being able to manage all the pieces and feel good about how you are mentoring. It lets the preparedness allows for what you just said. What they learn in the class is then reviewed at the facility, and the baseline from both is then applied through patient care. It helps to develop the competence level or improve the competence level of the fieldwork educator, meaning you're prepared You know what you want to do, A, B, C, D, just like with patient care. And then there's some consistency between fieldwork educators at a site that helps the students prepare for their boards as well. They come out entry level. As we tell them, there are 3 key areas that they're learning in their boards: PEDS, PhysDis, mental health. We try to give them a solid foundation with everyone get a rotation through PhysDis and then either PEDS or mental health, so that they're solid when they move forward in 2 areas out of the 3 on the testing. And then by being prepared, you and your brain between your ears have some way to objectively measure that student's performance. And the more objective you can be, the better you feel about how you're sharing information and how you're evaluating that student's performance. And the tools of the trade for preparation are all these bits and pieces that you see here. And AOTA offers a fieldwork certification. Has anyone here taken it? I know Jan has, right? She trains it. She teaches it. But you could. But has anyone else? Have you gone to any other types of fieldwork training? Yeah. So when you can, if for no other reason, even though you might be experienced and you know things, it's just refreshing to get around other fieldwork educators and share information and encourage one another. And it's just, you're a fun group of people, so it's fun to get back together. The other thing is, how do you use the framework information? Do you use that language in your facilities on a regular basis? I'm seeing some head shakes. Okay, does the school system use the framework as much? But the terms you might not use in communication or such, right? But it guides what you're doing. Okay, so you use the language. Okay, because the framework's come a long way, and in most settings now, people are using that universal language. And we really try to get the students to come out having that foundation coming out and being able to apply that language. But again, even though that exposure is there, it really comes to practicality once they're out in the field. And I'm not going over it because y'all are using it, but I like to include it in here. It's just so it reminds you that the use of the framework, if your student comes in and you feel like they need a little more refinement in their ability to reference the framework, have them go to identify the central concepts, have them identify the different sections and what is important about them. Have them look at the domains and be sure that they're applying that information with each of their therapy sessions, and have them look at the processes so that they're thinking of all the steps. And all of this we try to give them through those level 1 experiences. Even if they're not doing hands-on, the observations, give them the opportunity to apply the framework in a real-time setting. I'm glad we had the framework. When I started, there was no such creature. So everybody was using all kinds of different language. We thought we knew the same thing. But after a while, the problem with the alphabet soup is that everyone has their own letters, but not everyone has the same meaning for those letters. And I didn't realize how bad that was until one time I was having a conversation with somebody, and I had my letters, and they had the same letters. And after a very, several minutes of conversing, I suddenly realized it wasn't making sense what we were talking about. And I said, well, what are you talking about? And they told me what their letters meant. I said, well, no, I'm talking about, and those were my letters. So we had this lovely conversation with absolutely no understanding of what the other one was saying, because our alphabet soup didn't match. Whereas with the framework, the alphabet soup always matches. And then do you take OT assistants as well as OTRs in most of your settings, right? So let me just touch base for those newbies, just reviewing some of the roles and responsibilities as well. So you're working as the fieldwork educator as a role model. So you're not just the supervisor, but you're the guide, getting them from point A to point Z in the process. And then you're a major facilitator for learning. Again, you see this theme that keeps showing up in my slides about these routine meetings. I really am trying to, make subliminal message so that you won't even have to stop and think about it. But by having these routine meetings, they're minimum weekly for the level 2s. You can look at how they're progressing. You can talk about the documentation and the patient progress. You can communicate the objectively how someone's performing. You can talk about your consistent expectations. And you can really encourage the student to take their own learning to a different level, because they often feel like they're independent learners, but they need to have some hard targets to try to hit and master some skills. So really help them learn that, and then give them time to think out loud, because if you think about anything new that you even now are learning, a new technique, a new theory, anything new, we're taking a new class on course design. That's about made all of us pop. But when you're learning something new, you need to have time to process the information and really talk it out loud. How many times have you been trying to make a decision? Someone comes in the room, you say, "Can I talk to you a minute?" They never talk. But the very fact that they're a sounding board and you're talking through what you think gets you an answer that you hadn't thought of before. Use that same thinking out loud in developing that clinical reasoning, so that the student has to talk through what they're thinking with you, not you telling them what to think, but how did they come to that conclusion? Or you give them why that you want something done a certain way, and then you say to them, "So why do you think it has to be done that way?" So they have to sit down and really start to apply those concepts and ideas that they have. And you want to be shifting, and it's like pushing that boulder up the hill. The first few weeks, you're just constantly pushing that boulder, but by midterms and after, that boulder should be rolling down the other side of the hill and quite self-sufficient. So that's the transition. You need to be sensitive to that. In the beginning, you're giving more direct hands-on approach to the supervision, and then you're moving it to coaching and then supervision, distance supervision. Well, sooner or later I'll get to the OTAs and the OTRs. I don't know what's happening here. But one of the things, too, that you need to know is about the different programs, documents that you'll be receiving from the facility. Typically, and I'm not sure we've been doing our due diligence, you should be getting a course syllabus or some type of a syllabus that tells you the course of study or what the students have been receiving. I'm trying to get better about making sure that the fieldwork educators know what the students learn over the course of their studies, so that they know. You should be getting the evaluation forms. They can be hard copies or electronic copies, so that you know we will be moving to the electronic copies probably this coming summer. My glitch that I haven't been able to get an answer to is how people get the students to sign off and then send the forms in. So I'm struggling on how the signatures get done and processed. But by the time you get the electronic notice that they're electronic forms, I'll have figured that piece out. And then please return the fieldwork documents in a timely manner. I understand and fully appreciate, and I will never complain, related to your workload and trying to get the documents done. But we're asking you to try to get them done shortly after the students finish, because their grades do not go in until we get those forms back and that they're complete. So the students are sitting there with an incomplete. They do not get processed for their field work until we get all those forms back and they're completed and signed. We can't change them to having a passing grade, and if they don't have the transcript, it impacts their graduation and their ability to sit for the boards. So if you can get it done within the week, that just makes things helpful, and they get anxious because they want to get to studying and being able to register for the boards. And the easiest thing, or one of the key things to do, is that you do need to review the forms before you have the student sign off, so that the signature shows that both you did it and the students understood it. And make sure you have both signatures, and then review, look over to make sure all the pieces are completed, because invariably something is missing, like number of hours completed. I'll show you the FPE here shortly, which rotation it is, if the passing grade is a certain number for them to be able to pass. And what you'll get from me is an email telling you if I changed a grade when I add up your numbers. Please don't ever take that as a criticism of your math. I just don't like changing something on a legal document without letting the person who created it know that I made the change. And the only change I ever make is that if I add it and re-add it and do it on the calculator and it says 135 and it says 134 on the form, I change it to the 135. And one of the things, please, for your benefit, make sure that when you do the form, that your any fieldwork educator's email addresses on that fieldwork performance evaluation. We send the continuing education certificates via email to each of the fieldwork educators, and if we don't have the correct email address, you won't receive them. Yes, sir. Of course not. We do everything just right. Yeah, go ahead. It doesn't show up. See, that's... And that's what, like I said, I'm having a problem with that at the moment. Part of me is thinking, because I just did this, scan the first page, sign off on the first page. I mean, the rest of it's electronic, but if you just can download just that first page for permanent signatures. But by the time we do this, you'll get an email that says, this is what we're doing, this is where you can find it. We're also trying to get it so that all those electronic documents will be available and housed for you in a central location so that you'll get them, and if for some reason you don't have them, you will know where you can go access them for yourself. I don't think that it happens here, but sometimes we have fieldwork coordinators that then disperse the forms to the fieldwork educators, and depending on which agency or facility, sometimes those documents don't get to the fieldwork educators, even though they were sent to the coordinators. They get misplaced or misrouted. So if you don't get the information you need, please ask and ask again, because we keep trying to send them. But if you don't get the information, give us a different address, like not the coordinator, like for you specifically, and we'll get them to you. Okay? Oh, and the other thing about the CEUs, so that you don't get in a panic either, is we're changing it now to make sure they go out twice a year instead of doing them so inconsistently. So anytime you have a student that is summer, fall, the CEUs will be going out by that first week of February, so that we have time to get all the documents back and then verify who the correct fieldwork educators and emails are. Then you'll get those CEUs. Then for the winter, spring rotations, you will get it in the first part of summer, again, allowing time for the documents to get in. If you need it for some reason, either work or in the COT or for whatever reason, you need it sooner than that, by all means contact us and we'll get them to you. Okay? We are hoping that this will make sure that everybody gets them and we don't have people dropping through, the loops like we've had in the past. Okay. And then on AOTA, just so that you know, there's a whole section dedicated to field work, both Level 1 and Level 2 guidelines. I used to think they were impossible creatures to read because, I'm not a visual learner. But the reality is they're really well written, and they have just about everything that you could possibly need to be able to understand the guidelines and the standards for which we're supposed to be training up our students. On the AOTA personal data form that you'll be receiving, the students should be letting you know about their strengths, areas of growth, special skills, and their preferred style. And that way you have a little sense of the student before they actually come to you. And now the lovely FWPE. This says, Hilda begins to think she should have attended the panel on minimum marking at last month's conference of writing teachers. So I put that there because the FWPE is very simplistic in nature, but it has all these little spots that you need to be double checking to make sure things are done. And its purpose is to be able to measure objectively that a student is at entry level upon completion of their fieldwork rotation with you. And we're wanting it, as much as we want our students to succeed, and I tell this to students all the time, I want every single student to succeed in their fieldwork. But I do not want them to succeed if they are not competent to be clinicians. And that's a hard thing to understand. But the reality is we have to protect our clients' present and future to make sure that those individuals in our profession are absolutely capable of delivering the service at best practice at the level that we want it and the standard that we want to sustain as OT. So that's where the hardest piece comes, is being able to try to differentiate. And again, when we meet the next time, I'm hopeful of trying to help you develop some more objective measures that'll make it easier for you. But you're looking at evaluating the performance, not the individual isolated tasks that the student produces. You're looking at how they're performing in total from week to week to week. And if they make a mistake early on, you don't hold that over their head for the whole duration if they've learned not to repeat that mistake. But sometimes when you go to score that FWPE because the student miscommunicated or did something, that's foremost in your brain because you're remembering it. But remember to step back and not hold them accountable beyond reasonable expectations. If it's truly a problem in performance, you need to give them a score that reflects the actual performance. If they're doing, and that also flips to the other side, you don't give them stellar scores just because they're doing the things that you're asking them to do, because then they have no way to progress. So you need to be objective with it and really look at the performance. And our standards reflect our ACODE standards, there's all those lovely words, Accreditation Council for Occupational Therapy Education Standards, our academic settings. That's the standard we have to comply with. And then, of course, all of us with the NBCOT, we use that analysis of information from how our students progress and are successful on that testing to determine how successful we've been doing in terms of the academic piece, and then how the fieldwork has contributed to their learning. And then the FWP also, particularly at the midterm, allows the student to be encouraged to objectively assess their performance, their strengths, their weaknesses, their goals, how they would like to proceed, what they've been doing well, what they need to be working on. So it's a really good opportunity using that tool to be able to talk through things with the student and set up what happens for the last 6 weeks to be able to get them to that entry-level experience. And you need to, you're not trying to progress the students to above entry level. That's the other thing you need to remember as well. Many of the different facilities have specialized interventions or services or wings or a variety of specialties. And it's wonderful for the students to gain that exposure. But the expectation is not that they come out certified and skilled in that particular intervention or technique, because you learned a lot of training in order to be successful as a clinician to do it. Exposing them is wonderful, but don't feel that you have to get them entry level in those. It's a generic entry level that they could go into any facility and safely manage a caseload and be effective in their patient care and service delivery. Okay. The purpose of it, because it's over 12 weeks, is to, you have a midterm, you have a final. It's supposed to be able to reflect growth over time and competency and growth. And that's where the problem arises. If they get 3s and 4s at midterm, how much are they going to progress by the end of their field work? Because 3s and 4s are probably being very generous, because by midterms, you're looking at 2s with occasional 3s, because they're still learning. They haven't developed expertise. They're still learning. And the students, we try to help them understand that, but it's written in the manual how the scoring is. And once they know that a 2 is not a D or a C, then they understand that that's me progressing. And that, again, goes to how you help clarify it with them. And then also to assess the competence, this is where the side objectives come into play. And the better you write your side objectives, the better you're able to assess if the standards are being met. And your side objectives should be working off of that fieldwork performance evaluation so that you know what objectives are needing to be met. Okay? You need to make sure in that ethics section that is the ethics, that's what it's called, right? The ethics section, they have to score 3 or better at the final, or they fail the field work. So if someone gets a 2, you'll probably get a phone call or an email from me saying, did they really get a 2, or is that a mistake? And one time, the only time it's ever happened, it was a mistake. The person forgot the top part of their loop and did a lovely bottom part, and it looked like a 2. Or this pen skipped or something. Okay. Comparison of scores provides talking points so that when you work on your final, you can help them see the breadth and skill sets that they've developed. This is another thing that always fascinates me with students. They don't recognize their value or their competence over time. They think that people just get better because they would anyway. And they don't understand sometimes that it's really them affecting the change by how they're setting up the environment, what their activities they're choosing to do, how they engage with carryover to different settings. So sometimes being able to have those talking points, they go, oh, I really do see that. I just recently had a student who I did an online site visit, and we were talking, and she was really struggling with the supervisor and how to communicate with her. So I did a site visit, and the student was there, and the supervisor was there. And the supervisor had all these glowing things to say about the student. I mean, they were just like stellar. And then when I was talking to the student away from the supervisor, she had commented that she didn't realize that she felt that way about her. Like she felt better from having heard it because she hadn't heard that. And she was thinking she was doing things wrong. Why? Because the supervisor was giving her more and more challenging things to do within the clinic because she saw the potential. But somehow the two weren't clearly articulating that. So by talking through the fieldwork points on the performance evaluation, there's a better chance for you to be able to help the student understand where their growth has been and what your expectations are of them for the future.
I think it's also important. You guys have the students complete their own FTE and care. I find that really helpful. Yeah. You can learn a lot. And you can kind of get a sense of what they're thinking about their competency, what areas might focus on, if there are ways that you can sort of increase the challenges. They're progressing really well. And then even maybe looking at education. So as level ones, students now are expecting different types of supervision than I do. I'm used to kind of saying, tell me what you did, what happened, let's talk it through. And students want to hear a lot more, you did a good job, this is what you did well. And so not every supervisor does it that way. And like you're saying, the student who says, oh, we have poor communication, I don't think the supervisor likes me, I don't think I'm good enough. And in reality, the supervisor thinks she's doing great, but just isn't always telling. So
and it was
different styles.
And it wasn't that she wasn't communicating, it's that this particular supervisor was so busy, she was wearing too many hats. So she wasn't realizing she wasn't communicating the positives. She was just had the time to share what needed to be done, what was going wrong, what needed to be polished. So that sometimes busyness interferes with that communication as well. So when you're looking at students, these are just some things to consider early on in the early assessment, not necessarily when you're completing the FWPE, because they're going to tell you how your student's doing, and are they complying with the policies and the ethics and the safety issues? Are they demonstrating the initial knowledge of common diagnoses and things that you may have asked them to do, or that they're at least researching it each evening when they go home and they realize they didn't know something? Are they able to identify the relevant areas that are needing to be assessed with the client based on the diagnoses and your typical course of care? Do they demonstrate effective communication skills and the therapeutic use of self? That therapeutic use of self, those are 4 words that if they flush to the sea, I would be happy not to hear anymore, because it drives me crazy. Because everyone says, as a student, well, I'm using my therapeutic use of self. Now, don't y'all remember saying that, right? But helping them understand what that actually means from a classroom is really a challenge, because what they think it means, and in reality what it turns out to be, are often not closely aligned. So they will understand that therapeutic use of self, and they will actually be able to use it at a basic level. But you're going to have to help them understand how to get over that hump so that they actually are taking into consideration, the sound of the voice, the use of the environment, the tools that are in the room, the preparation as they're walking in and being able to talk, how loud, how soft. So they need that help because they hear the word all the time, but they're not quite sure how to actually make it work. They need to be able to demonstrate some logical or at least rational judgment. Where's their common sense? And be effective with their time management and organization. You're not the parent. It's not your responsibility to make sure they follow through on things. It's theirs. It's their ability to self-regulate and initiate. And see how they assume responsibility for any behavior and learning. And then are they receptive to guidance and feedback? And one of the things that I try to tell students, because when they get feedback, they hear sometimes it as criticism, and they've heard the terms constructive criticism, but they hear it as a negative. And my point to them is there's criticism and there's correction. And if your supervisor is talking to you about what needs to change, they're giving you a correction. They're telling you what you need to do in order to be more effective in what you have just done. They are not trying to tear you down. Their value is that you are there and successful because that reflects positively on them as a fieldwork educator. If they are critical, meaning that they are tearing you down, making you feel small, making you ashamed or embarrassed, and they're doing it at the cost of you and your self-worth, that's criticism. And in my opinion, no one needs to stand and deal with that at any age or at any level or in any location. And that's a time for a phone call. Because no one should be criticizing a performance. They should be correcting a performance. Does that make sense? And somehow, when students hear that, suddenly it makes things make more sense. That I'm not being criticized for doing something wrong. I'm being corrected in order to do something better. So just tuck that away as a thought when you see how they're receiving. Now, some students that are feeling entitled are going to take a little more getting through to, okay? But that's a whole different issue. And then, when do you contact the academic fieldwork coordinator? When they are demonstrating unsatisfactory behaviors. It can be as early as in the 3rd or 4th week. You don't have to keep giving the benefit of the doubt. Don't be quick on the draw to jump on it and go, well, they're just not doing it, so they're out of here. You need to assess that very discreetly, but you should be seeing the behaviors and the patterns happening over and over and over again, and no change occurring, even though you're giving all kinds of corrections and accommodations and modeling and mentoring and opportunities to learn. Those are the red flags, and you need to be aware of them, okay? And you just need to be able to know that the student is going to be successful at the end of their affiliation. And if you think they're not going to be at entry level by week 12, you need to be in touch with the academic fieldwork coordinator, because we need to put contracts and things in place so that we can either shape up or ship out. I mean, this isn't, as I said, we're protecting our clients as well as educating the student. Now, on the FWPE, these are the things that I just need you to pay attention to, and I'll show you the first page here shortly. But full name, name and address of the fieldwork site, which one's being completed, the order and the dates, number of hours completed, final score, whether they pass or fail, student comments go on that first page as well as throughout the booklet, and the signatures that the student evaluated it and that the fieldwork educator contributed to the report, and any others. So if you have multiple people supervising the student, they should all be signing off on there and giving me their emails so that you can get the CEUs because you contributed to the supervision of the student, okay? And please include your credentials. With all the variations of things, it's my pet thing. I really like to give credit with the credentials, MS, ODR, PhD, whatever you are, okay? Because you've worked hard to get there. So for me to just guess at it and stick OTR/L on there, I don't like to do that. It's all legal, but I like to give you your full fancy pants names, okay? That's the way to do it. All right, and then just another review, talking about the scoring. This is based on the OT form. There are 2 forms so that you know. There's an OT form and there's an OTA form. Make sure that when you have the student, the level that they are is the level of the form that you have, because they're different and there's different numbers of them. So You need to complete the original forms. The OTA student has 25 performance items. The OT student has 42 to score. And the scoring goes from 1, 2, 3, 4, with 4 being exceeding the standards. And exceeding the standards means exceeding the standards, not just meeting the standards. Needs improvement is logical at midterm because they're still learning and needing improvement. Most of them should meet the standards and get 3s by the end of the 12-week rotation. Please don't add half scores on there like they're progressing towards. There's no such creature on the FWPE. It has to be whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, or 4. When you give me a half score, I'm in trouble because I don't know whether they're meeting standards or not meeting standards.
One question that comes up every time. We don't help with our psychiatric unit.
Mm-hmm. There's a quick,
Supervise.
right.
Hey, we always kind of credit because we feel we do that.
Mm-hmm.
But
So how do you ethically score that? What she's asking about is on the Fieldwork Performance Evaluation form. There is a specific question that asks on the OT form about their ability, their supervision or some cooperation with the OT assistant. And many sites don't have an OT assistant, so that's not something they can actively do as part of their course of learning. We encourage then for students to either have them do some reading so that they understand more about how they would actually supervise an OTA, because that's not something that I'm aware that we cover extensively in our field classes. I don't think we touch on it, but it's not an extensive, so they can't in practical application go out and know what are they allowed to do, what the code is allowed to do under their supervision. The other thing is that's acceptable is if you do some type of role playing, where if you're doing a co-treat, you would be the coda and have the student guide and direct you and give you the information, much if they're doing the evaluation and the goals, then directing you on how you would manage it as the coda, because they're still demonstrating competency or understanding even though they're not actually performing it. And that'll give you some way to objectively measure that and not feel like you're sort of cheating on the evaluation form.
I know that MPCOT has upgraded their website, and there's the student section and a section, and they offer a lot of trainings, videos, different modules, and I don't know if it's possible, maybe the student ones have something related to vision of quotas as OTs. I wasn't a student when that happened, so I don't have access to it, but that might be something for them to think about or follow up with BCOT and see if they have something they're even recommending that would be a good addition to that. Because it's true. I've been in mental health and I've never had quota. So it's always been a challenge with that.
And for any of those situations where the questions are something that they don't get the opportunity to experience, see, when you give them a 1, that makes them look like they aren't learning, okay? But you can't give them a 3 because they didn't demonstrate anything to you. But if you have them demonstrate they have knowledge, so that if they were in that situation, for whatever situation that is, then you can objectively score, were they able to do it, or do they still need to do more research and understand the process? And that can be on anything, but typically it always comes up with the OTA question. Okay, and on the form, it tells you all this. It's a no-brainer. I just put it all on there. And in terms of sample comments, I love it because some facilities send me full-page reports on how the student progressed on their letterhead, and that way it can be used by the students if they need it as a reference, and it's beautiful. But I also love the short, quick, sweet ones as well, because I just want to know how they did and what we could do to impact them doing better or at least sustaining that standard. So these are some things where, at the midterm the person was given a 2, and what they said is demonstrated good ethics and is improving with her abilities to consistently anticipate possible hazards guarding of patients. So as you can see, it doesn't need to be lengthy. It just needs to be something that clarifies what she needs to do to move from the 2 to the 3. The student then knows it. You don't need to comment on every single thing. You can do a generic paragraph at the bottom. But the point is, you're not just writing to fill in a blank. You're writing to share information that's of benefit to the student or to the academic setting related to how things are progressing. And the summary comments should reflect the overall student performance. It's the big one that goes on the front page. It's a summary of the full 12-week period. Some can be a separate letter. Some of it can be just on the booklet. And this was one that was written on the booklet, and it pretty much covers, the fundamentals for the 12-week period. I like this. Overall, the student will be a wonderful addition to the field of occupational therapy. I mean, you can say that for every single one of your students that are at entry level. And even though you say it for every single one of your students, they don't know you say it. They hear it themselves for the first time. But that makes them feel so good because you now have told them that 12 weeks of work has been they are now competent and capable. Just remember that they don't know that that's your typical statement, but having a nice typical statement at the end that you don't have to think about but applies will be positive for both sides. Do you want to do an activity instead of sitting and listening to me for a while? Would you like to try an activity? I think we're going to switch it up because we've got several other things to talk about. But what I'm going to hand out to you, and this is in small. You could work on tables. And take one of the table, if you will. This is our interactive session for today. So what we don't finish today, we have it up here too. We have it. Oh, you do have it up here. Yeah. Where do you put it? Here. Okay. We actually have it up here as well. But break down a small. Sorry. Trying to make it. I have an extra too. All right, so what I'd like us to do is start off, because we just talked about the FWP, right? So now the student makes a one-time error. How and when you address the situation with the student. And it's the error. There's too much information about yourself while attempting to apply therapeutic use of self. Figure out how you're going to store error. So, sort of how long that error before you decided that they actually had learned from it. And then what we're going to do is talk about it together. Just do number one. You got 5 minutes, and then we're reconvening. A milk chocolate. Really? I was one of the worst places for chocolate. Like, sweets always going to be the principal. So we have a quarter. You know, like the thing and so there was always a designated quarter for a treatment. Sometimes it was candy, other times it was mints, so much salty things. So there was always something together.
It's like, these people get me. Sometimes when I do things like this in class, and they're so, literally tell them, you can talk to each other, do nothing. I want to. Yeah. 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes. I was just going to type up your answers.
Oh, good. It's getting quiet.
I was going to say, how are we all doing?
Are we ready? All right. So, somebody give me a response. What would you do? Who has an action plan here?
And it's like,
Yes, ma'am.
Write it in a way that it looks like maybe initially, struggled with sharing some information, was receptive to therapist feedback, class, further grading.
sounds like a documenting. Writing a code. Yeah. That's exactly, yeah. Other thoughts?
As long as there wasn't anything else that required giving a one-time they took information, accepted that feedback, applied, so that shows that they're with time period to apply appropriately.
I saw a hand up on the back. Yes.
Oh, okay. That's why I'm typing. The summary of what they said is that they would talk to the student immediately with a one-to-one in a one-to-one setting, quiet and away from everybody else. And they would identify the specific event that occurred, what language was used, what should have been used, how it should have been done, how it should have been said differently, what changes they expected the student to make for the future, and then to document what they documented what occurred and what was expected. For the score in the midterm, they'd give them a 2 because it did happen, and they were expected to see change over time. If the change didn't occur, it would stay a 2 at the final. But if it did, it was whatever the score was for performance over the 12-week period. Yeah. Any other?
Has anyone had one of those students who's just a talker? I've had quite a few of those. And sometimes it's challenging for them to understand that their normal way of interacting with people has changed. And so you can also use that opportunity as a reflective opportunity to talk about, how would you interact with your faculty member or your someone of a different stature or status than you. Just kind of looking at different ways to talk to people and getting them to understand that there's a certain way that you interact with your clients or when you find yeah. thoughts about role play? How does that help? Yeah, that's one of the things that I know in my classes we've been talking a lot about. What are those boundaries? How do you set those boundaries? How do you stick to those boundaries? How do you get over that thought of, I just want people to like you? It doesn't matter if someone likes you. You're there for a reason. Can you get that reason? Can you get that job done? And still maintain your boundaries?
It's almost like being a parent. For those that
Yeah.
you tell your child about the tells you, well, I don't like you, and that's a good thing. That means I'm doing my job.
And to that point, that's exactly right. Because what I tell students want the instructors to teach them what to do, right? Train them up, teach them, train them up, teach them. And I tell them that, unfortunately, being an OT student, our role is to move out of the way of being in front of them. That we aren't teaching, we're guiding and setting up the environment so that they can be owning their own learning. But it's a hard concept because they're expecting a parent, because that's what teachers do through high school, right? And sometimes the beginning of college. But it is helping them to learn to be confident and capable without constantly needing someone to guide and direct them with every step. All right. Now, I'm going to show you this video. And it was created by an OT student, not one of ours. I don't know who created it. She put it out there on YouTube, and it was sent to me. And I don't know why it just cracks me up, and I show it all the time to the students. So I'm going to let you watch it, and then I want you to talk in your teams again as to how it was managed, and if you've seen somebody like that, or what would you do in that type of situation, okay? Let's see, is this the one? Oops. This one.
Welcome to acute rehab.
What that be?
My name is not B, it is Clara Honeydew, OTR.
Whatever.
Please do not speak to me like that, I am your mentor. On a side note, do you need a place to change clothes?
Nah, I work well with patients looking like this.
We have a dress code here at the hospital.
All the boys at the club say I look good.
I am pretty sure that is not the sort of attention we are looking for here. All staff must have their bellies, butts, and cleavage covered, and we all must dress as modestly as possible. Please come with me so that you can.
1 second, my phone is ringing.
Excuse me, that isn't.
Quiet, I am on the phone. Hey girl, what up? No, he did not.
Get off the phone. In fact, I do not even see a phone.
1 second. It is Bluetooth.
I do not care what it is, get off of the phone.
Hold on, Monique. My girlfriend just broke up with her boo and is now trying to get with his best friend.
You are making your school look bad. I am extremely disappointed in your behavior. I will graciously let this slide for today. Now get off the phone so we can go bedside.
Sorry, Monique, I need to deal with this boo. I will call you later. Do not talk to me like that. I am your student. You need to treat me with respect. If you do not treat me better, I will write you up on Easy Fieldwork for being a bad site.
Let me get this straight. You show up to my facility dressed like you are going clubbing. You rudely interrupt me when I am trying to explain to you the hospital policy. I am going to kindly ask you to leave, and I will notify your fieldwork coordinator of your behavior.
I do not have to stand here and listen to this. I am going to call my father and have him deal with you.
Wow.
My dad will deal with this place.
Goodbye.
So mothers of entitled people. So anyway, it's a parody of a whole lot of different behaviors. But take a moment and think about that, because what do you do if they're carrying their cell phone and they don't, what do you do? How are they supposed to use it? What do you do about dress code and whether they're in compliance? Or what do you do with the tone and the affect that they're using in conversation with you or with others? So what do you do? So take a minute and talk to one another, and we will add that to the list. Okay, now wait a minute. Give me back to that little piece of paper. Thank you. Trying to find New Times Roman, but it's not here.
Type in times. It's time to room.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Now I can make it look the same, you know? I don't know.
Times New Roman.
I'm so glad you're here. Thank you.
It's fine. It's nice.
Yeah.
Spacing is a little weird.
Oh,
I struggled with for like half the day and typing that stupid thing.
I do want to collect the things back, though, so that we have next week. Okay. I guess we don't get them all done today.
All right, so let's come back together and let's hear some responses. Who wants to start us off?
Kara, I see you.
At the time, right, a while, we just say, talk to her about the relatability with the patient population. And since we had a lot of people, they were saying that you kind of want to present yourself as not pulling the hair back. So when you walk, but yet kind of break it down in a way that's not true to their style, but making them more professional for people that they're serving.
Okay. So really highlighting the professionalism, but also still trying to allow them to be an individual. And it's challenging. Things like hair color, I've worked with students who have recommended before we started level 1 fieldwork that they should probably dye their hair back to the normal color. But not every facility is quite as stringent. I don't know, Hopkins, you guys have a policy about hair color? Natural?
But some of the nurses have purple hair.
Yeah. That was, yeah.
That's living in Baltimore all these years. That purple just comes out, right? Sorry.
Lavender streaks in the hair.
Yeah.
I find it very challenging now to force any. By the time you do it, you realize how.
Yeah.
So it's very thin. And then when the therapists are hearing certain things, you can't say to a student, "Well, we don't want that." You can't do that.
But I think broaching it the way that you said and considering the patient population, the environment, what you see others around you and how they're dressed or how they're appearing, that's a good consideration because you want to blend. You don't want to. It's not all about you as the clinician. It's about your patient, regardless.
Particularly for students, age of college, already young to carry that, and so that sort of manifested, they kind of assured them they're not professional.
Yeah, absolutely. The patients aren't going to be engaged. They don't want to receive services from someone who's walking off the street. They want someone who looks like a professional. That's exactly like a professional. You know, sort of what you were saying about how other people look too. When I was working at the state hospital, the medical students would often come in, and I would look at them and I would think, wow, that is a lot of chest you're showing. It's not a good thing. And then, you know, trying to reinforce to my students, like, that's not good. You should follow what I've talked about as a dress code. It doesn't matter what the med students are doing. They're going to have to deal with their own thing. So, but it is challenging when you have others in the facility who are not following the proper code too. Yeah.
Or if you're dealing with a patient in a way that's inappropriate, that you may give them.
Right.
So you learn that, and it's really in any setting that you work in.
Yeah.
Well, the various female doctors.
And in addition to, I stopped wearing perfume
That's a very
when
good point.
I was in my 20s and working with a lot of young adult males because I didn't want to give the wrong impression or the wrong message. And so I just stopped. Period.
And now we even think about, you know, that's sort of a policy in a lot of places is no strong perfumes. We'll have a lot of smells that they're sensitive to. It might cause people to be nauseous, have headaches, this kind of thing. So, ahead of your time. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. How to bridge that gap that is there, yeah. And it's absolutely.
But it also where so all metropolitan area, and so our patients or clientele, they're used to seeing people with different clothes, hair color, different piercings, and so they're not taken aback and
a student to very well dressed, very nicely put together, and sort of use that as a barrier, shield. And the patients would often say she doesn't seem engaged because she won't even take off her coat. She won't even, she dresses a certain way. So sometimes it's, yes, they do look very nice. They're well put together, professional looking, but it is that carriage, that attitude.
I think that sometimes in those situations, I believe that as the fieldwork educator, that actually think through some police work.
Yeah.
You're really clear in your mind whether you're trying to communicate, whether it's a couple of examples or what. Because I could imagine the student might be sensitive about whatever you're doing for not.
Right. And it even be, like you're saying, with the different religious attire or different things that are part of a religious observance, asking a question versus saying you can't, you're not following dress code. You might say, "Oh, I've noticed that you have a different here, you have a different something on your head, different shirt, something like that. Can you tell me what that's about?" Then we can work. Yes.
I guess I was taken aback that happened.
Right.
How did she get dressed like that? Turns into like
The client looked a little comatose to me when I was looking at the person on the bed.
after you make a comment, and then it becomes a banter.
It's stuff. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's an exaggeration, but you're right. Like, it's even talking about that power struggle. As a supervisor, you do not want to get into power struggle with your students. Or as a clinician, you don't get into power struggles with your clients. And how do you set those limits, even as a supervisor?
I had a student where I needed to give a lot of feedback about professionalism, and at a certain point it was the student was probably recommended the way that it was even coming up. So I just kind of said, okay, I'm just going to get some guidance from your university. And I would just sort of play down and say, is this acceptable to the student? And kind of let them handle it because it wasn't me taking seriously.
That's a really great resource. Pulling up those other resources, fieldwork coordinators, faculty members, the university itself. I would always say, to clients, it's a hospital policy. I can't really do it. And so you're kind of saying, yeah, this is our dress code, but if you're not going to listen to me, then we'll talk about diversity.
I think it's really important for always give somebody the benefit of the doubt. So, like I said, if somebody comes in with purple hair, they should have known before they
Right.
But if you address it and you say, well, really an appropriate thing for this setting is this thing you can do to fix it, and they actually make the effort to
Absolutely.
try to address it better versus to correct it. Has told one initial mistake against somebody for their whole fieldwork experience and just allow them to correct their mistakes.
And even providing feedback, saying, thank you, I see that you've taken an effort to dress a different way or your hair is different. Acknowledging that they've tried, made those efforts can be a good part too.
I had a student this past semester where I used that information for the future. So if this is important, and you need to remember that when you're looking for a job, that it is important, and make sure you accommodate. You're going to have confidence. Walk with the test. A lot of
It's true. I know this is obviously something we probably spend all night talking.
I really don't know where to draw the line, to be honest. You do have a lot of therapists, and they do. We have at least a couple people that have worn green in their nose. I've been with some when you're pretty white, and she said that to me before, and she continues to wear it. But I don't Well, we did. Since our student showed up on the first day with a ring in her nose, and it became kind of an issue at the time. She ended up in fact how she wanted to have this individual visit, and she really feels like it's important to have this ability to express herself that way, and it just kind of came up, especially because we weren't that.
Maybe that's something to think about as far as well in grown. Are we all following hospital policy? It doesn't specifically have to be around that piercing, but looking at policies in general. If we're not following all of our policies, we're endangering our patients, we're endangering ourselves. We're taking risks if Joint Commission comes and you're looking like.
And that ties back to what kind of support you get from your facility.
Yeah.
So the bottom line, where the line is drawn, is if it's impacting patient care, I don't care how individual you want to be, you're not there to be an individual, you're there to deliver patient care according to the standards of the facility. If it is an issue where you're feeling like it is a standard that the hospital or the facility expects and everyone's complying, and you have a student that's arguing with you, then call in the academic fieldwork coordinator, because I can promise you you'll get the support, and the student will be encouraged to rethink their viewpoint. If it's something that you're seeing, and like the slide earlier, it said that when you take on a student, it's learning on a two-way street. And sometimes we ourselves become institutionalized, where we're doing the same thing the way we've always done it, because it's always worked that way. And sometimes the student, just by appearing, starts to have you rethink the hows and the whys. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it opens up conversation. And everything that we've been dialoguing about through the evening, it keeps coming back to how do you communicate with one another, and how do you communicate with your student? How do you communicate with the academic setting? So that communication is key. The point being that when you have these challenging and frustrating students, there's a wide range of ways to manage them. But being respectful, knowing what your standards are, and then if you know you're not going to change it and it's not impacting patient care, sometimes you just need to let it go. Put that balloon, put the helium in the balloon and send it to the air, And I always, and I'm sure you've heard this story. I'm going to tell you a story because we're getting close to the end. And we'll continue with the next workshop, heading into red flags and how to manage challenging students, both those with special needs, weaknesses, and advanced skills. And then we'll look at how to refine and define objectives. We'll do more of the questions that are on the sheet and application of the things that we've done today. So let me say thank you, first of all, for your attention in laying all this groundwork. But here's the story. And maybe you've heard it, but it bears repeating. Once upon a time, there was a gentleman who loved his wife's pot roast. She made the best pot roast on the planet. He could not believe how wonderful her pot roast was, but every time that he's giving out the evaluation forms, if you can complete them and return them to us, that'd be appreciated. So he said to his wife, you make the best pot roast on the planet, but why in the world do you cut off one end and then cut off the other end and then put it in the pot? And she says, well, I don't know. My mother always did it that way. You have to ask my mom. So he goes to his mother-in-law. He says, Mom, you and your daughter make the best pot roast, but why do you cut off one end and why do you cut off the other and then put it in the pot? She says, well, I don't know. That's how I learned it from my mom. So he goes to the grandma. Nana, you've done a wonderful job in raising your daughter and raising your granddaughter and teaching them how to make this lovely, wonderful pot roast. But why in the world do they cut off one end and cut off the other? She says, I don't know why they do it, but my pot was too small. And I like that story because it always reminds me to step back and think about, why am I doing it? Am I doing it because it's generational and it's always been done this way before? Or am I doing it because it's the best way in which to produce the result that I want? So you can make a good pot roast, but know why you cut off one end and cut off the other, right? So any questions that you have regarding anything that we've covered today? No? So I hope you've learned, and it's been a benefit, and I do appreciate your attention and your time. It has been a pleasure, I'll tell you.
Thank you.